Good evening, everybody. A very warm welcome to Kaizen Central. This sunny, certainly as far as I'm concerned, on the South Coast, but very cold Thursday evening. Some of you, particularly those in the United States, I believe, are having slightly better weather of it. We always discuss weather. It's a very British thing. As promised in the email I put out earlier, I'm delighted to welcome back Bill Morris and Blue Star Recyclers in Colorado. And Karen Quinn from All About Autism. Karen, a very warm welcome to you. Karen was unfortunately unable to join us when we first heard from Bill. And it was a very last minute thing, but I'm delighted she can join us today because we can talk, about the way that you're in, am I correct in saying you're in Penrith? Is that right, Karen?
Yeah. Right.
How this project is going to get going in Cumbria. James Emmett as well has joined us. James, hello there. Terrific to see you, guest of Bill's. And James has really been the one who's undergone a lot of the training with some very large companies in the United States around this issue of employing not just people on the autism spectrum, but anybody who has been deemed unemployable by the norms of society. We're missing out on a lot of talent as a result of that. And James is seeking to plug those gaps with Bill and Karen and bring some of that to this country. So we're utterly delighted by that. James, now, number one, I don't know, does everybody remember, or were you here when Bill gave his first presentation? Bill, I'll tell you what, if you could just 15, 30 seconds, just literally headline, and then we can pass on to James. So I'd love to bring James into the conversation, but just in case anybody wasn't here and didn't catch the original conversation.
Sure. Thank you. So we're a nonprofit social enterprise based in Colorado. We opened up about 12 years ago, and our mission is employing people with autism and other disabilities through electronics recycling. So that's our enterprise here. Karen and I met a few years ago, and then she became involved with AAA and Penrith and on autism charity in Cumbria. And we looked at 3 or 4 different things and ended up with the best way we could share with what we've learned is to bring a program over that James and I are doing here, which is training employers on how to leverage this workforce at a time when a lot of employers are struggling to find good entry level. James calls it loyal labor. So that's what we're doing, and that will essentially involve James training Karen and her team, and then Karen and her team kind of bringing that to the UK.
Superb. Okay. Well, James, you've got a lot of industry-wide experience, pardon me, with manufacturers and service companies in the US. Could you possibly explain to us, please, what kind of training you've been giving and what you've learned about the sort of very large gaps in our workforce that come from this very misguided view that certain people in our society are basically unemployable?
Yeah, no, thank you, Nick. It's great to meet everybody, and I'm James Emmett. I own James Emmett and Company. We are a growing, family-owned, growing company that provides disability inclusion consulting, and we do it mostly in the manufacturing, logistics, and food production industries here in the United States, and work with very, very large companies in distribution and manufacturing. But we also work with a lot of mid-sized manufacturers as we're growing. I just got off a call actually with a United States-based kind of collaboration of manufacturers. So I think a couple things that we do when we partner with a manufacturer, we want to start with doing what we call disability awareness training. And that is just the basics for on the ground supervisors, folks who are doing the direct supervision about how to support individuals with disabilities. And what you see and what they end up seeing is it's really more alike than different, because I think what we're finding is the secret sauce, the secret to our success, right, is, and I know these are comparable statistics to the UK, but we're in the United States, 25% of our country now has a diagnosed disability, right? 1 in 4 Americans have a disability. Of that, 70% of those individuals have an invisible disability, things like autism, learning disabilities, ADHD. And what does this workforce, this really fastly growing workforce, have in common? Well, a lot of those individuals, number one, they like physical jobs. Unlike the stereotype of people with disabilities, they like physical work. They want to keep their mind and body busy, and they like jobs that have core routines. They don't necessarily have to be the same thing every day, the same routine, but they often like jobs with core routines. Well, what are a lot of our manufacturing jobs? They're physical, and they often involve at least some type of core routine. And so we're seeing that kind of that matchup, that success. Now, those folks may come in and they may not interview the best, right? They may not give you a ton of eye contact. They may not blow you away in the job interview. But if we think about this workforce a little bit differently and think about what the opportunities they present to us as manufacturers, this is an amazingly group. And the other piece of that is what we're finding in the US, and I'm sure it will be the case in the UK, is that there people with invisible disabilities are already part of the workforce, right? Are already part of your workforce. Now, they may not have told us they have a learning disability, or they have ADHD, or they have autism, because they were afraid the impact that may have if they told their supervisor. But once a company starts this initiative and we do the training and we talk about building an inclusive environment, we see current workforce coming to the table and saying, I have a learning disability, or I have a child with autism, or whatever. And it really creates this rally effect. So and I will say, and now that I'll turn it back, but I think the thing that I think is really important, and we just finished discussing with the manufacturing group in the United States, is this is not about charity, right? This is not done out of one-off. This is done, it's done in a systematic fashion, looked as a business initiative. And yeah, great stories come out of it. Great social impact comes out of it. But to do this well, we have to treat it as a business initiative and think about that workforce as such. So I'll stop there, but that's kind of some of the things that we are focusing on here in the United States.
Well, thank you very much, James. You've worked with some quite large companies. Am I correct in saying? I believe
we have. Yep, we have. So, for example, right now we are working with Advance Auto, one of our largest auto parts, in their distribution centers and stores. But we just started a large contract with Reynolds Consumer Products in their manufacturing plants. They make the hefty garbage bags, Reynolds aluminum foil, those type of things, and they're doing it. We're looking to do it across their plants and hire 40 to 50 people with disabilities per plant per year. So some fairly big numbers there, but also, we've also seen the success in the family-owned manufacturers that want to hire 3-4 people as well.
Is it possible, James, to determine? I mean, this is a tough question. What percentage? I mean, if we're saying that if we've got like 70% employment, how much more is there from people who are either feel they are excluded or who are actively excluded?
I do think there's more, right? I think that it, and we'd have to look, we look at geography by geography, but what we're seeing here in the United States is that when you translate a message of valuing people with disabilities, valuing difference, you're going to attract some people who are working in other companies who've felt uncomfortable, but had a disability, and B, you're going to bring some people out of their homes, out of schools, directly into your workforce, and I think, Nick, the other piece of this that is really cool is, right, these are people, once they find a home in your company, they stay. right?
Yeah.
They stay, and they want to be with you and be part of your brand. And they're, we see this especially with the labor market in the United States. Everybody's jumping from job to job, right? There's so many jobs available right now that in the essential businesses, that if somebody isn't happy, they leave and just go to the next distribution center manufacturer. That's not what our community does, right? Our community demonstrates that loyalty as well. So lots of potential from both sides of that.
Thank you. Karen, do you mind if I bring you into the conversation? Because I mean, the initiative that Bill started and the work that James is doing is brilliant in the United States. What are you hoping to achieve in July? I believe it's July, when you guys are all getting together in the UK.
Yeah, so by way of a slight introduction, my day job is working as a program manager for the National Autistic Society. And a few years ago, I was asked to look at enterprise models that work, because for the last 20, 30 years amongst the autistic community, unemployment has sat at 86% in the UK, but over 70% of those adults want to work. So the figures for unemployment in the autistic community are much higher than they are in the disabled community, and they're not that good in the disabled community. And I had to look at America, and it was a long time that we looked at various models. And for me, it was a really simple concept, because James and Bill very much come from it. Yes, you have to look after the employee, but first and foremost, what's in it for the employer? Because so many times you hear that, someone with a disability or autism is put into a workplace, there's no support mechanism around that, other employees don't understand what to expect. And to be honest, the employer almost can't wait to get them out the door at the end of their placement, because it just hasn't worked. And that's where we kind of tinker around in the UK, whereas Bill and James actually came at it from, this has got to work for the employer, you've got to have loyal labour, you've got to show the productivity that this workforce brings. And that's why their model's been so successful. So Bill and I have been working in the background for the last 2 years thinking, could this model work in the UK? What would it look like? How would we have to set it up? And how would we have to introduce it and get hearts and minds behind it? And we're going to start in Cumbria, where unemployment is quite a challenge, especially, and there's a huge amount of isolation due to the rural geography and structure. And Bill and I actually believe that we can get this up and running in Cumbria. We've got a couple of employers already really interested, really infused, because they're suffering at the moment from such a high labour turnover that I think they think, if you can do anything about that, then we're willing to listen. And the idea is that as of July, we'll launch it. So James is going to come over. This is if the COVID gods allow. James and Bill will come over. We'll do a launch with publicity, and we're hoping to get the American ambassador up. And we're going to start at Cumbria Recycling Limited. We've got a feeder school that's going to work with us. James is going to train AAA staff to hugely high level, I think, having seen the training program. And we're going to start rolling it out. And we've got a phased rollout. So we work with one employer to begin with, then we're going to work with 4 employers, and then hoping that our employment specialist will then continue to up. So 40 employers therefore, and that will generate so many jobs. But we're very keen that the story doesn't end in Cumbria, that actually, if we can prove the concept, this is a model that a lot of hopefully employers like yourselves will be interested in finding out about. But I think the beauty of starting in Cumbria is we'll be able to bring the data to you as well, to say, actually, we can show you this has worked. And it has been, we have been able to translate and bring it over from America and make it work here.
That's brilliant, Karen. We'll get on to talking about how we can support you, but Roy Howarth pointed this out to me earlier today. I'm going to share my screen. I don't know if you can read that. I'll read it out just in case. Some of society's most talented and creative people have a neurodiverse profile, of which dyslexia, autistic spectrum condition, dyscalculia, and dyspraxia are probably the best known. We put in place support systems that allow such staff to perform at their best and aim to do this without the need for formal diagnosis or the labeling of employees. The principle is to recognize the positives, maximize the potential, address the challenges, that present in the workplace and meet staff needs through advice, discussion, and appropriate adjustments. And that is from GCHQ, which is the UK equivalent of the NSA in America. So it's Spy Central. But of course, they need a lot of people with significant smarts and talent, and it's very good to see nonetheless that they're doing that. Perhaps I could just show also, because I think this is important, and show this web screen. This is obviously a recruitment company. And again, Roy showed me this. Interesting in the background there, you can see Deutsche Bank, GCHQ again, JP Morgan. So things are happening. This is not an entirely barren desert that this message is falling into. But I suspect that just as James and Bill have found in the United States, the green shoots are few and far between, and you've got to work very hard to find them and nurture them and grow them. But this is a fantastic effort. So last time we spoke, Karen, when Bill was on solo, people were talking about making connections with places like BAE Systems, who build submarines up where you are. I think it's submarines. Yeah, I think it's submarines. Build something very large up there anyway. And I believe that John Hardwick, who's not with us this evening, has been talking to Bill. Bill, can you perhaps update me with that? Because John and yourself have had productive conversations.
Yes, thank you for that. And Karen and I had a call with John, and John introduced us to, I think, 3 employers up in the Northwest and in Cumbria. We've reached out to Barry at Playdale, and I think it's Nick at what's the paper company, Karen, called?
I knew you were going to come to me there, Bill, and I'm just scanning my emails.
They're in Kendall. That's all I remember. They have an operation in Kendall, but so we've reached out to them. So thank you for that. John has offered his help to connect us to anyone up there that he works with. So,
well, that's fantastic, because obviously, I know inevitably there's a financial input, and I would ask anybody really on this network, and I'll do this. What I'm going to do, I'm going to possibly, if I can, and if you don't mind, James, I'm going to isolate some of what you were saying and put it out as on social media, and be quite blunt about the fact we're looking for support for this initiative, and I think that might go some way. But I'd like to throw this open to anybody who's got any questions about this, and or maybe just some experiences, because I think that the key thing that I heard James say, I think it was James, beg your pardon, I can't remember who said it, but it was that the people who are silent, is, we don't know. There is a disability or a neurodiversity there, simply because they're too scared by circumstance to talk about it. Has anybody had any experience of working with people like that, or even being like that oneself, and having to suffer in silence? Yeah, so, Roy, good evening.
Good evening. Yeah, so maybe I'll jump in. I recognise one of the things that James said was that, whilst I don't underestimate the challenge of finding more positions for people like this, they already work with the company. They're already in the company. I know we've been approached by people when we do careers fairs, parents, children who come and ask us, and they're declaring that, they've got dyslexia or something like that. And our approach is a little bit like the GCHQ one. But I always joke a little bit with people that, they say, will it be all right? I said, well, we already employ an awful lot of people with these kind of neurodiversity challenges. We call them engineers, and then the ones who've got the really serious problems we call experts. that's the approach we've got to take. And I would say we've put our toe in the water. We're trying things like the disability campaign. I can't remember what it's called, disability confident or something like that. In fact, a few of our graduates, particularly on my site in Portsmouth, started a program, and they found 2 or 3 of them who had dyslexia, the one you can't pronounce. So maybe I've got dyslexia. And they got together and started talking about what could we do, and talking about how we could change the HR processes. So I think you can take lots of little steps, but again, it's getting the business to recognize the benefit. And just to finish, one experience I had in my network, I had a guy, and he was looking for, I think it was his cousin, who had I think he'd been diagnosed autistic, and he was looking for work experience and having real trouble. And I contacted, he lived in the Bristol area. I contacted some of our colleagues in Filton, and they offered this young chap 2 weeks work experience in Filton. They were a little bit sort of cautious about it, and they said, we'll give it a go. At the end of the 2 weeks, he was still at school. They were telling him to apply for a job when he was old enough and eligible. And I recognise, where we do have people with those issues, keeping them in the business is not an issue. It's getting them in the first place and setting them up so that they can succeed. That's the key.
Yeah. Well,
I should point out that Roy works for Airbus, and works on the satellite side in Portsmouth, just down the road from here, but obviously is well keyed in with all the various other parts of Airbus in the UK. A quick question, Paul, before we go on to Alison, who's got her hand up. Sorry, Roy. Would it be absolutely right to say that, and I think your last story demonstrates this, that nobody's doing this out of a sense of charity, that these are business decisions being made at Airbus?
No, I'm very clear. We employ everybody for a purpose, and they've all got to contribute, and we all contribute in different ways. I'd say the approach in Airbus is we're really trying to embrace all kinds of diversity. And we do quite a lot on the gender. We've done quite a lot on LGBT. I think we won an award recently, or we were proposed for an award for our approach to LGBT issues. And I would like to see neurodiversity addressed in exactly the same way. And there's no lack of intent in the business. It's just making it all happen. But yeah, this is not because we want to look like a charitable enterprise. We build things and we make profits, and everybody who works for us has got to be involved in that.
I think that really underscores the power of what James, Bill, and Karen are doing. They're actually trying to provide the channel by which people can get to these jobs, and I think that's probably the story here. Alison, you had your hand up.
Yes, so I think just to piggyback off what Roy was saying, there was a Bill and I's contact person who introduced us to each other, Megan, Roy's, where a company, a large, really, I might have even been a part of the government. I don't want to rat them out here, but they were considering taking on someone with autism, and they were finally talked into it, and it was a 6-week program or something, and they said they would have this person come on a probationary kind of purpose, and let's see how they do. And within 2 weeks, this young man found a $4 million accounting error. And immediately they jumped on that. We're like, yes, he is hired full-time right now. And they said she said the hesitation, any kind of growing pains after that were certain accommodations that we all take for granted. So for example, the only real hiccup that existed after that fact was that young man came to work and the parking space that he always parked in, somebody was there and he didn't know what to do. And he kind of had a little bit of an anxiety attack. And so there are little things there that I think that through like James and through people like Bill and who have these kind of experiences that they can share with these companies willing to take on a workforce that is incredibly invaluable. I think that that kind of stuff becomes totally workable. If you know what you're working with, heck, I'll take somebody who panics over a parking space any day of the week if it means that I know they're showing up to work.
And they maybe save $4 million in the process.
You know,
I hope they negotiated a percentage of that. That's amazing.
Nick, if I could jump in just for a second, I also, because I forgot to, I wanted to thank Allison in front of the group, because Allison's the person that connected me to you. And so Allison, thank you for doing that. This is amazing how all this kind of comes together. But one thing that is sort of under the surface with this population is we tend to talk about the kind of examples that Allison just cited, and there are many, and employers have experienced these. Our experience with this population has been that the real miracle of the workforce as a whole, yes, there's probably some just brilliant people on the high end, but in our experience, and as I shared with you a couple of weeks ago, no absenteeism, less than 10% turnover, 98% task engagement. That's the miracle of the workforce. It's the productivity, the reliability, the loyalty. So Hollywood has kind of peddled this idea that everyone with autism is on that way high end, and there are some, but I would encourage everyone, and you might have them already in your work floor. It's the day-to-day showing up and getting the work done, as Allison said, that really is distinguished them.
You know, and let me add one other thing, if I could, to what Allison said, is if you talk to the companies that we have worked with and other companies who have done this well, especially in the distribution and manufacturing space, I think to a company, they will tell you they've become better operators because of this initiative, right? Because when you ask your supervisors to do things like provide clarity and directions, clarity and feedback, structured steps, right? You know what? It doesn't just help people with autism or people with disabilities. It just helps, right? It just creates that more inclusive, structured environment where people thrive. And so I think that's the other piece of this is there are individualized business benefits, but the company as a whole, once you create that disability and autism brand, I think it really impacts the operations as well in a very positive way.
That's a great point. Thank you, James. Roy.
Yeah, just to add one point that I think it came from the lady who heads up our diversity and inclusion activities. And it's not to underestimate the challenge, because what she said was once you've solved the problem for a person with challenges, you've solved the problem for one person with challenges. And the issue is that you can't then cut and paste that for every other one. Each person is an individual, and each one has different challenges and different compensations need to be made. So that's the work is in the details of matching to everybody's abilities and making sure that you take care of everything that causes them concern.
I wish I'd brought my wife into this discussion, because she's an employment lawyer, and I'm just wondering if, Roy, your HR contact has, or James and Bill and Karen as well, has anybody mentioned worries about, oh well, if we're not careful, we're going to leave ourselves open to to somebody filing suit for whatever reason? Is that, James, you're nodding your head, is that a potential issue?
Fear and stigma, Nick, are the #1 barriers to doing this, right? And that fear and stigma often exists in the risk factor that people perceive it to be. If I fire somebody, will I get a suit? What we have found, at least in the United States, is it's actually the companies who try to push disability to the side that end up in difficult situations, right? The ones that embrace disability very rarely see legal action kind of taken because of that embrace, right? So it's actually a counter effect that we see, but fear and stigma, right? And in manufacturing, people, every company we talk to says, well, I'm just worried about safety. I'm worried about the legal risk, and I'm worried about people producing, right? And as long as we know that, we can start those conversations and address those fears, right?
Okay, thank you. Phil Kernock, hi.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Just a couple of things. Nick, I sent you an email on 22nd of April, just with a few contacts on BA Systems. And also somebody, Sharon McDonald of Northwest Aerospace Alliance, I think would be good contacts for the Northwest activity. Karen, might be useful contacts for you. I don't know if Nick, you might have forwarded it, but if you could order them. I can do introductions as well, Karen, if you want. I don't know where you are with BA Systems, but certainly there's a route there.
Thank you.
Also, one of my businesses is a company called Value Chain, who does a lot of different software solutions, but we also scrape data, public domain data. We've done that we helped the Made Smarter program scrape data on manufacturing businesses in the Northwest. So we actually have a list of, we have Southwest as well. For instance, there's 18,500 manufacturing companies in the Southwest of England across different commodity areas. So some of that data might be useful for you to try and pick out appropriate commodities and manufacturing capabilities that might be useful as well. So I'll talk to my team on that.
Well, Phil,
Great.
thank you. And mea culpa if I didn't send it on. I've just found your email, and I've just sent it on to Karen, so that connection has been made. You're the second person today, Phil, who has pointed out that I haven't responded to an email, and I'm feeling deeply ashamed. There's somebody else on this meeting tonight who has, I won't say who it was, and I apologize to anybody I haven't responded to. The rebranding kind of took my brain away. Steve, hi, Steve Murphy.
How you doing? As I've noted in the chat, my son is severely autistic, and he is a long way down the spectrum. In other words, at the moment he cannot be trusted to cross the road. So he would be. You couldn't put him into a possible health and safety situation. So what I'm going to ask is that have you found companies that embrace people like James? That's my son. The sort of thing he is particularly good with. He's particularly good with animals, you know. So just wondering, it's not obvious to me, but I'm just putting the question out there that within the manufacturing space, where do you think James could find a role? But he cannot get a bus or anything like that. He has to be given a lift and all that sort of thing. I just wondered, if, just to put it out there, have you found places for people like James within the manufacturing space?
I think Bill will jump in here, Stephen,
Yeah.
but on a personal note, my daughter is in the same boat as your son, and you do worry quite significantly about their future and what they'll attain. And the one thing that made me really sit up and listen to Bill was, we're not just employing, your autistic, your Asperger's, your Rain Man type people, which tends to have been the traditional push in the UK, because that seemed they're kind of acceptable. And Bill said to me once, one of my best employees was non-verbal. And, and I think the other really exciting and interesting thing for me to note with Bill's workforce is a lot of these behaviors start to calm down. The stimming, and the need for sensory feedback starts to calm down when you give people meaningful employment and tasks to do and a feeling of belonging. So I'll pass to Bill there, because Bill can tell you this firsthand.
Yeah, it's really the first 4 young men that really were the genesis of Blue Star. Were I think 3 of the 4 were on the very bottom end of the spectrum in terms, I guess the way I see it, nonverbal, had never even had a job interview, let alone a job. What we found was that there were tasks that once they were engaged, once we taught the task of disassembling a computer, there are 8 steps to that using a powered screwdriver, a battery operated screwdriver, and a couple of other small tools. And once they had it down, we were amazed to see how they took to it and how much they improved every day. And it was something that created comfort. I'm a layman at this, so I don't have any degrees or anything, but I can tell you that my experience with our workforce is that this work produces comfort, and they're also good at it, and they enjoy doing it. So what you end up with is a person that wants to come to work and wants to contribute, and as opposed to our traditional employees in our industry, they find reasons not to show up to work and to goof off. So I don't want to simplify it because it's different for every person, but
Sure.
We can usually find a task for a person to get started. In our plant, it might be feeding hard drives into a grinder. It might be taking one circuit board off of a hard drive, or sorting some material. But what I will say is the only accommodation we have at Blue Star is a working interview. So all that happens is, instead of sitting behind the desk and as James mentioned, it's very difficult for them to share off of a resume if they have a resume. So we just go out to the plant and we have them try 3 or 4 different scopes of work. We show them how to do it and we watch them respond. And generally within one of those 4 scopes of work, they've got it. And that's where we start them. And so it's pretty simple.
Brilliant.
Bill,
Thank you.
sorry, I just noticed on the chat, Bill, someone's asked you if you feel the work gives them purpose and fulfillment. So I absolutely know you'll have an opinion on that.
Man, I'll tell you that I've never quite seen anything like it. The people at Blue Star, nowadays, I don't hire most of the gang. I usually try to meet them when they first come aboard, and then I'll run into them 3 months later, and I don't recognize them. Work does something for human beings, and I think we all know this, but we're hardwired for it. And when this gang gets an opportunity to come to work, the change to their emotional, mental, and physical well-being is I've never seen anything like it. You won't recognize them quite often 3 or 4 months to 6 months after they come aboard. So the answer is yes.
And oh, sorry, I didn't mean. I just go ahead. Sorry.
I just wanted to ask Steve a question. Steve, I'm wondering what, given your son's condition, has there been anything out there in terms of channels into some kind of work that you've been able to access, or has it been a pretty barren landscape?
I would say, on the whole, I would say it's well intentioned but barren. In other words, he liked working at the garden centre. He's pretty good. To be quite honest, it's ridiculous because I've got this big list of qualifications that you get nowadays, but in the middle of it, he's got I think he's got an O level in gardening. So basically, he's right down the autistic spectrum, and he's got an O level. He's pretty good at gardening. But I think, yeah, generally, I wouldn't say there is any positive or imaginative ways that people look at people with James's abilities. It's more, well, can we put them somewhere where they can sort of not cause too much mischief, you know?
Yeah.
It's a bit mixed, but James is a long way down the spectrum. So dogs. So yeah. They're like kids, only worse. That he really does. He cannot cross the road. You've got to be careful with health and safety type of stuff. But gardening he's pretty good at. Structured tasks, yeah, like making his bed and all those sorts of things. He's pretty good at working with the dogs. Possibly something within gardening. I can see possibilities. Maybe particularly as a lot of people in sheltered housing look after like pets and things. He sometimes takes the dogs to the old folk to the care home where my ex-wife works. So the possibility of working in a sheltered accommodation, looking after the old people's pets and keeping the garden tidy, I can see opportunities. But there could be some other opportunities that have come out of this conversation. But on the whole, I would say it's a bit imaginative. There's a fair amount of health and safety. He's pretty good with animals. We try to get him into his stables. Oh, he's not old enough, you know. So there tends to be a fair amount of roadblocks, and my ex-wife and myself sort of developed some skills in overcoming, mainly persistence. But I'd say on the whole, yeah, unimaginative in every area, but well-meaning. But I think there are better ways, as the presenters tonight have shown.
Yeah, I think that really underscores the importance, because it's not about James, it's about us. And it's about the responsibility for making something happen. James, I cut in on you. You wanted to respond to what Bill had been saying.
Well, and I think to the points we're making here, there's no easy fix to help companies recognize the abilities, as we were just talking about, the very specific abilities of some people. And I have a daughter with more significant disabilities. But for me, there's a path, right? In other words, the more we build partnerships with companies, help them start to understand and build disability inclusion, what we have seen is, companies who 2 years previous to when they started, they said everybody has to work in the exact job description. Everybody has to do all the tasks, to the point where they started to understand the benefit of using people's skills, to the point we were just talking about, right? Where there may be specific roles that fit somebody well in a very repetitive task. So again, it's a journey. There's no magic pill here, but building those partnerships with companies and sustaining those will also help them understand how we employ people maybe with more significant barriers.
And I'll just piggyback one thing really quick on that as well, is that if you think about things about diagnosis like autism, it has a set of what we would think of as deficits, like say someone that's overly rigid in their routine or overly focused. But then if you put that person at a job doing detailed assembly or disassembly work, that deficit becomes an asset, because they're really comfortable and interested in making sure that no mistake is made. So in our experience, the safety record, we have less than one lost time accident every year with 55 employees. The reason is I don't think they're any more interested in safety than any other employee. But when we teach a procedure to a person with autism, they will follow that procedure to the T, and not cut corners and rush things and throw things around which cause the injury. So they're inherently safe, which is counterintuitive, right?
Andy, you've used the hand up. Is there something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I don't know, Bill. You remember last time you were on Kaizen Central? You talked about how these guys just turn up and they do a day's work and they go home with a happy smiley face. And and in previous incarnations of me, I'd have killed, for want of a better phrase, for stuff like that. I do worry, I guess, and I absolutely get your programs. But I guess the thing that worries me is that we might be sort of 10 years too late with this. Well, I mean, I guess always too late. But what effect do you think, the whole sort of industry 4.0 and robot processing, which, manufacturing is supposed to be moving towards, what effect is this going to have on the repetitive, the mundane jobs that ordinary people don't want to do? If that makes sense.
It's a great question, and James can answer probably better than I can, but I would just say in my industry that a lot of electronics recyclers are threatening to automate, and some have. And I would just say that I think there are some that are going to have to at scale if they're so large. But one thing about this workforce that I've tried to communicate to my industry is that to automate, you have to have so much volume to pay for the equipment. You've got to get from here to there, and this workforce has a lot of flexibility to work schedules that traditional employees would maybe be interested in. So to get from here to automation, if you have to automate, this is a wonderful workforce to utilize. And then they'll be the ones to stick around to run the equipment because they do it our place if you get there. So we may be a little too late at some levels, but I would just say this is a workforce to look at. If you're not quite there, they'll help you get there. James, do you have an idea on that one?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what you just said, and to this point in my experience, I completely agree that automation will eliminate, in the future. But as I think, as a point in the chat, it will be in the future. Some of those repetitive jobs in manufacturing, but in the automated facilities that I've been in, the most automated, we've actually seen more success for disability inclusion because the jobs are structured. There still needed to be people supporting those machines. But the jobs were not necessarily as complicated as some of those in more traditional manufacturing. So I agree. I think there is a little jeopardy to this, but more, I think there's on the positive side, and especially, Bill, as you said, over the next 10 years during this transition, to get a great labor force who wants to get their foot in the door, learn, and move up. For me, it's a good time to do that.
Yeah, people have been saying in the chat box that this 4.0 thing, not everybody's going to automate or digitalize straight away, despite Sarah Duff no doubt hoping they would. Sorry, Sarah. But yeah, it's obviously going to be a process, and even so, I don't know. I don't run a factory and haven't worked in a factory, so I don't know what the sort of balance of desirability between having a machine doing something and a person doing it, if that person does it really reliably and turns up to work 24/7, 365, etc. So we've got 11 minutes or so. I really want to leave this with Karen, Bill, and James to talk about anything else they want or need for July, because we really do need to to help focus and channel some of that assistance if we can. And thanks again, Phil, for what you did, and I apologize for sending it late.
Yeah, and Nick, thanks. I would turn it back to Karen and just say that and I mentioned this I think a couple of weeks ago. We're really fortunate. The American Embassy and a foundation here in the States are covering the cost for James and I to be there, to get there and get this training started. I think, Karen, can you update the group on kind of where we are on what we really need is some probably a few corporate sponsorships and then just some businesses that are willing to sign up for the training. So
yeah, and please excuse the audience, because I've been on many presentations where people are perceived to come with begging bowls and say, help, help. But I think what I've found on this journey with Bill is I wouldn't say relatively easy, Bill might disagree, but we're pushing on open doors in America because they've seen what James and Bill do. They know it works, and therefore they're willing to match funding. But of course, quite understandably, they're not going to be able to give us all the funding. So we do need to source some in the UK. And to be honest, with my charity head on, I've been targeting your traditional national lottery, and that's okay. But what I've come full circle is the people that understand this are the business people. And it's quite difficult sometimes to get the national lottery and that on board of what you're actually trying to achieve. So I think if we can get one or two corporate funders or a group of corporate funders that want to get behind this, they will reap the rewards, because it's all about sustainability. And this isn't, and I work for a charity, and the tradition of a charity is we're going to come back at you every year and ask you for the same money or a bit more. And you're like, oh my God, this is more commitment than a marriage. I'm now stuck in this loop. Whereas Bill is and James, the model is get us up and running, and we'll bring the money back to you at the end of this in a much more productive workforce. This will pay for itself. And even in my conversations with the National Lottery, they're like, well, do you want to put in something for the next 5 years? Well, no, we don't. We just want enough to get us up and running. And they struggle with that. So to my mind, in an ideal world, I would have corporate sponsorship every time. And I think I'm hoping that for corporates, they'll look and say, actually, our American cousins are willing to front up the money. Can we match it and do something special here?
What kind of loot are we talking about here, Karen?
I'd say around £35,000 would get us up and running. And that's what our American friends have offered to put into the pot. So between us, if we went for the 50-50 model, we'd match them, and they'd be happy to do that as well.
Sorry, when you say you're American,
oh yes, sorry, the Dakota Foundation, who Bill has a proven track record with, and I think this is amazing that they are willing to put up $35,000 to get Bill and facilitate it getting up and running in the UK. But what they've said is that they want to price match. So if we get a UK funder, they'd love to work in partnership. So I'm also hoping from a UK perspective, this is a really good opportunity to build some partnerships and links with US counterparts as well.
I mean, seriously, that is not a vast amount, but it still has to be winkled out of somebody's probably CSR budget, I would have thought, but should be coming out of their HR budget. That's where we'd all like it to come from.
And Nick, there was something that Megan, again, Bill and I's contact, pointed out when it comes to these dollars. She's got kind of a, not a sister program, but kind of an aside project herself. She sees a lot of those dollars coming out of people's marketing budgets, or even their training budgets if they have something specific. But marketing, because not only are you looking at the workforce development side of things, but it's good PR. So if you're trying to get creative for where the dollars are coming out of, that might be a potential thing to look at.
Well, and that's a really good point, because what we do here is share the metrics. This is the beauty of this is very metric rich. The number of jobs that are created produce economic impact through taxpayer savings and additional taxable income and reductions in use of public services and healthcare and things like that. So, and so we can pass that back to the sponsor and say, you've helped create this many jobs by helping us train these employers. And then you guys can post those numbers on your websites and say, we made that happen.
I think, Bill, if you can remind me, you did a study of what the saving to the public purse was.
Yeah, it's actually
shocked you.
Yeah, it did. We were claiming about 10% of the social impact that we were producing. An institute came in and did a year-long study, and they they interviewed all of our employees and our their families and their doctors and their therapists and their service providers. And they built a formula, and essentially at our organization, a person that works at Blue Star produces $48,000 of taxpayer reductions and economic impact every year. So this thing doesn't cost, it pays, because when they're working, they claim far fewer benefits, and because they offset that with earned income. When they're working, they're happier and healthier, so they're not ending up in the ER or in a hospital or with a therapist, or in Karen's seen this, that running into the law. And then they're in the legal system, which is a lot more expensive. So the impact to the whole community is pretty dramatic.
That is amazing, and that is that then starts to become a political issue as well. So
Yes.
it's like so many things in both our societies where it's seen to be better just to chuck a pot of money at something and hope it goes away already or recedes or is not in our consciousness, when in fact a creative solution could both make people happier, which is the most important thing, but also save some cash along the way. Well, listen, everybody, opportunity for final questions or thoughts, because we're heading into the 7 o'clock witching hour. Please, just if you've got any last minute thoughts you'd like to put to James, to Phil, thank you.
Look on the Cumbria LEP LEP. I tend to know the different LEP networks. I don't know if you've engaged with them to get some funding, but their board has a guy called Stephen Cole, who's the Chief Infrastructure Officer for BA Systems Maritime on the board of the LEP, the Local Enterprise Cumbria Group. I'll send you a link to his details. It might be worth, I don't know if it's appropriate for an LEP funded kind of skills funding. The thing we have with LEPs, they do tend to scatter funding, but also skills funding, training tends to be difficult a landscape for them to fill. It tends to be done nationally with a lot of our government funding, but it might be another route as well.
Well, thank you, Phil. That's very creative. Melissa, I'm sorry, I keep calling her Melissa. Alison.
I'm changing my name to Melissa officially. No, Bob had a really great question in the chat. Is there an initiative name that we should be using to broadcast?
AAA. So, Karen, is that correct?
Yeah. We call it the AAA Blue Star Initiative, which maybe is a bit of a mouthful, but but AAA, and that would get it.
Yeah.
And you're
okay.
AAA.org UK, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's brilliant. Well, listen, everybody, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Our friends in the United States, as always, what a great pleasure to see you. James and Bill, Alison and Karen joining us from Penrith, really appreciate it. I mean, you've obviously got some good thoughts coming out of this group. I'll see what I could do to try and perhaps widen the conversation on social media with some of this stuff that if I can get a decent video clip out of what James has done. Maybe, James, it may serve us to do a side interview that we can, we get a better quality chat out of that, if that's okay. I'm not sure, Bill, can you please make sure that I've got James's email address, because I haven't seen it so far, I don't think, on any traffic. That'd be great.
I'll send you James' information as soon as we finish up.
Fabulous. Okay, everybody, thank you for engaging so positively, and great to hear some fabulous stories. As always, this group amazes me with the power, the energy, the love and the passion. So take care. See you all next week. To our friends in America, thank you. Go well, and see you all again soon.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, everyone.